In March of 2023, a children's book called Are You With Me was published in the small town of Kamas, Utah. It was written by a young mother of 3 named Kouri Richins. The book told the story of a boy who lost his father and how to cope with the grief of that loss. The author gave interviews to local TV stations, explaining that she had written the book with her sons to help them process the death of their dad. A touching story. Except 2 months later, Kouri Richins was arrested and charged with the murder of the very husband whose death she had been so beautifully mourning on camera. The woman who wrote a book about losing a loved one had engineered that loss herself. This is a story about how the thirst for money, crushing debt, and a double life led to a cold-blooded murder committed not by a stranger in a dark alley, but by a wife, the person you share a bed with, raise children with, and build a future with. The person you trust unconditionally because you have the same kids, the same home, and the same life. And it was exactly that trust that became Eric Richins' fatal vulnerability. Kouri Darden, her maiden name, was born in the early 1980s in Oklahoma. Her childhood was anything but stable. The family moved 17 times across different states because of her parents' work. Her father, whom Kouri described as a successful engineer, ended up in prison when she was 6 years old, after a drunk driving incident in which a police officer was injured. Her mother, Lisa Darden, became little Kouri's only anchor, though she herself struggled with a gambling addiction. Kouri called her mother her best friend. They were inseparable. Around the year 2000, Lisa, Kouri, and her brother finally settled in Utah. There, Kouri attended school, then enrolled in college, while working part-time as a cashier at Home Depot. Even then, certain traits were already visible, traits that would later define her entire life: ambition, the ability to make an impression, and an absolute certainty that she deserved more. Eric Eugene Richins was born on May 13, 1982, in Bountiful, Utah, to Gene and Linda Richins. He grew up on the family cattle ranch, where from an early age he was accustomed to hard physical labor. A tireless work ethic became his calling card. After high school, Eric left for a 2-year missionary service in Mexico, where he became fluent in Spanish. After returning, he enrolled at the University of Utah, earning a bachelor's degree in international relations, with an additional focus on Spanish. But an academic career held no appeal for him. Eric was a man of action, literally. Together with his close friend and business partner, Kouri Wright, he built C&E Stone Masonry from the ground up, a company specializing in stone masonry. The business thrived. Eric not only provided for his own family, but also helped friends start their own ventures. Eric's first marriage ended in divorce. He kept the details private. Eric was not the kind of man who put his pain on display. But his friends knew the divorce hit him hard and left a deep mark. That made the joy even greater when he met Kouri. They were introduced by Linda King, a co-worker of Kouri's at Home Depot. He was the sweetest guy, King later recalled. He had the most amazing laugh. Eric was one of those people who are genuinely loved by everyone around them, open, generous, with a distinctive infectious laugh, always ready to help. He owned a whole fleet of recreational vehicles, ATVs, snowmobiles, side-by-sides. He loved spending time outdoors. An avid hunter, he felt right at home in the mountains of Utah. Kouri was energetic, charming, and had big plans for life. The contrast between them was obvious. He was solid, calm, a man who earned his living with his hands. She was ambitious, fast-moving, hungry for the good life. Eric was the kind of person who appreciated what he had. Kouri was the kind who always wanted more. But at first, that difference seemed complementary. He gave her stability. She brought energy and ambition. On June 15, 2013, they got married. The wedding was held right in the backyard of their home in Kamas, a small mountain town about 40 miles from Salt Lake City, surrounded by the Wasatch Range and the famous ski resorts of Park City. Kamas is the kind of American town where everyone knows everyone. Population, a few thousand. Quiet streets, ranches, horses, mountain air. This is where Kouri and Eric started building a family. They had 3 sons, Carter, Ashton, and Weston. Eric turned out to be the kind of father every child dreams of. He coached his boys on every team: basketball, baseball, soccer. He was head coach or assistant at every game. He spent countless hours with his sons, teaching them to play aggressive and give it everything. And the money he earned from coaching, he donated right back to the clubs. Eric's family described him as a man of extraordinary generosity. He helped not just those close to him, but strangers too, donated to charity, and never turned down a request. His friends were his second family. Kouri was not one to sit idle either. Domestic life was not for her. She got into real estate, buying houses, renovating them, and flipping them for profit. In America, it is called house flipping, a lucrative but risky business that requires instinct, capital, and cold calculation. For Kouri, who grew up in instability and constant moves, real estate became a way to prove to herself and the world that she was worth something. Houses were not just assets to resell. They were symbols of the success she had so desperately lacked in childhood. At first, things went well enough. In 2019, Kouri officially registered her company, Kouri Richins Realty. She got the startup capital from a home equity line of credit on their family home in Francis, a HELOC for $250,000. She renovated 1 or 2 houses a year and sold them at a profit. But Kouri did not know how to stop. The scale began to grow rapidly, and the problems grew right alongside it. By 2021, Kouri Richins was simultaneously managing 15 renovation projects. 15. For one person without a serious team, that is a catastrophe. In the 3 years since founding her company, she had purchased 22 properties. The volume of purchases had ballooned from $2,200,000 to $6,700,000 in a single year. Contractors demanded payment, deadlines were missed, expenses exceeded budgets. From January 2021 through March 2022, there were 236 attempted overdraft transactions on her accounts, totaling more than $300,000. The bank rejected most of them, charging nearly $6,000 in fees. Checks to contractors bounced because there were not enough funds. The total amount of return checks exceeded $300,000. On every house she sold, Kouri lost money. Between commissions, renovation costs, and closing expenses, losses exceeded $900,000. One buyer of a home Kouri had sold later sued her after discovering mold in the house that had never been disclosed. But the crown jewel of her reckless ambition was the Midway Mansion. In December of 2021, Kouri closed a deal to purchase a massive estate in Midway. Nearly 20,000 square feet of living space, a 3,000 square foot guest house, and almost 9 acres of land. The price? $2,900,000. Renovations would require roughly another $2 million. Kouri secured a loan for $3,200,000, but that barely covered the purchase price, leaving nothing for the renovation. After this deal, she was roughly $1,600,000 in the red. Eric was against the purchase. He thought the house was too expensive. The couple had a serious fight over it, but Kouri insisted. The deal was supposed to close on March 4th, 2022, the day Eric died. Kouri closed it the next day, on March 5th. But on the outside, everything looked perfect. Kouri crafted an illusion of success, a beautiful life, smiles on social media, expensive things. Inside, though, there was a financial abyss. By the time of Eric's death, Kouri's debts had reached, by various estimates, between $4.5 and $7.5 million. Monthly payments to creditors amounted to $80,000. Forensic accountant Brooke Carrington testified at trial. On the date of Eric Richins' death, Kouri Richins was in financial distress. Her financial enterprise was crumbling, already crumbling, and without a significant infusion of cash and capital, would have continued to crumble. Kouri's net worth, the day after her husband's death, was negative $1,600,000. And this is where it gets truly sinister. Kouri found a way to solve her financial problems. And that solution was her own husband. Starting in 2015, Kouri had been secretly taking out life insurance policies in Eric's name. By the time of his death, there were at least 6 different policies. 4 of them, totaling $1,900,000, were purchased by Kouri without her husband's knowledge between 2015 and 2017. Another policy, for $100,000, was filed with a forged signature from Eric. The application even listed the wrong Social Security number. A document examiner later confirmed in court that Eric's signature on this policy had most likely been forged. On February 4th, 2022, exactly 1 month before Eric's death, yet another insurance policy went into effect. The prosecution claimed that Kouri had signed the application in late January. On top of that, she made herself the sole beneficiary of a policy Eric had held jointly with his business partner, and she had done so several months before his death. When the insurance company notified Eric of the change, he restored the original terms. But that did not stop Kouri. Shortly before his death, Eric consulted an estate planning attorney named Crystal Bowman Carter. He wanted to create a trust that would not include Kouri as a direct beneficiary. He sensed the threat, even if he could not fully grasp its scale. Alongside her financial manipulations, Kouri was also living another double life. She was in a romantic relationship with Robert Joshua Grossman. They met in South Carolina. Grossman had responded to an ad for help renovating a house Kouri was flipping. A connection formed between them, and eventually Grossman moved to Utah to work with her. A handyman on her job sites, he gradually became something more. Their affair began around 2020. Kouri let him live in one of the houses she was renovating for sale, bought him 2 pickup trucks, and gave him money whenever he needed it. Jurors at trial saw dozens of text messages in which Kouri and Grossman professed their love for each other and dreamed about a future together. Roughly 2 weeks before Eric's death, Kouri texted Grossman, "I want a future together. I want you. To figure life out together." And in December of 2021, 3 months before the murder, she sent him another message that prosecutors would later call chilling. "I can't expect you to sit and wait for the day the trigger gets pulled. The trigger gets pulled." A metaphor that may well have concealed a very concrete plan. Later, testifying at trial, Grossman recounted a bone-chilling detail. About 2 weeks after Eric's death, they met in the Winta Mountains. Kouri asked him, "Have you ever killed anyone?" and added, "What's it like?" Grossman said, "No." Their relationship continued for another 6 to 10 months after Eric's death. A month after her husband died, Kouri texted Grossman, "I think someday I want you to be my husband." But ultimately, the relationship fell apart over disagreements, and Kouri herself ended it. So by early 2022, Kouri Richins had everything she needed to commit a crime, motive, millions in debt, and insurance policies on her husband, a plan, and a complete absence of remorse. On February 11th, 2022, the first purchase of fentanyl took place. Kouri reached out to her housekeeper, Carmen Lauber. Lauber cleaned the Richins' home and, as it emerged at trial, had connections in the world of street drugs. Kouri asked her to get something. According to Lauber, Kouri mentioned What Michael Jackson was on, referring to a powerful painkiller. Lauber reached out through Facebook Messenger to an acquaintance named Susan Kohler, who in turn connected her with Robert Crozier. Crozier said he knew someone with fentanyl pills. Lauber checked with Kouri to see if that would work, and got a yes. The exchange took place at a gas station in the city of Draper. Lauber received the pills and handed them over to Kouri. And just like that, one of the deadliest synthetic opioids on the planet ended up in the hands of a mother of 3. But Kouri decided that was not enough. She wanted a guarantee. On February 26th, she reached out to Lauber again. In a text message, Kouri wrote that she needed something stronger. Lauber arranged a second purchase. Kouri received another batch of pills. Between the first and second purchases, something happened that would become one of the key pieces of evidence of attempted murder at trial. Valentine's Day, 2022. Kouri left Eric his favorite sandwich from a local deli, along with a note, a sweet message from a loving wife. Then she left the house to meet Grossman, her lover. Eric was home alone with the kids. He ate one piece of the sandwich, and immediately felt something was wrong. His body broke out in hives. His breathing became labored. Eric reached for an EpiPen, an auto-injector of epinephrine they kept in the house for one of their sons who had allergies. He injected himself with the adrenaline and drank a bottle of Benadryl, an antihistamine. Then he went to bed. He texted Kouri, "I'm going to go lie down. If I don't feel better, I'll go to the hospital." But Eric did not go to the hospital. He started feeling a bit better and fell asleep. But Eric Richins was no fool. A few hours later, he called 2 friends and told them something that should have changed the course of events, but tragically did not. To one friend he said, "I think my wife is trying to poison me." To the other, he said that after eating the sandwich, he felt like he was dying. Those words were a cry for help. but no one took them seriously enough. No one called the police. No one insisted on a medical examination. 2.5 weeks later, Kouri Richins was dead. March 3rd, 2022, the eve of Eric's death. It was a special evening. Kouri and Eric were celebrating the closing of the Midway Mansion deal, that same $2,900,000 house Eric had objected to buying. The deal was set to close the next day. According to the prosecution, that evening Kouri made her husband a cocktail, a Moscow Mule. It is a popular drink made with vodka, ginger beer, and lime, traditionally served in a copper mug. Kouri also prepared a lemon drop, a shot of vodka with lemon juice. The prosecution alleged that Kouri laced one or both of these drinks with fentanyl. Their 3 boys were asleep in their rooms. In an orange notebook found beside Kouri's bed, investigators discovered an entry that read, Moscow Mule and Lemon Drop Shot. Prosecutor Brad Bloodworth pointed out at trial that this entry was fully consistent with the toxicology results and pointed to a premeditated poisoning plan. On March 4th, 2022, at 3:21 in the morning, Kouri Richins called 911. She reported that she had woken up and found her husband unconscious at the foot of the bed, cold. On the recording of the call, she can be heard crying, saying she did not know what had happened, that she did not know how to perform CPR, but was willing to try. However, prosecutors drew the jury's attention to an important detail. The 911 operator asked Kouri to begin cardiopulmonary resuscitation, but 6 minutes passed before she allegedly did so. 6 minutes. She did not immediately try to save him, the prosecutor stated. When paramedics arrived on the scene, they pronounced Kouri Richins dead. He was 39 years old. The autopsy revealed the cause of death, fentanyl overdose. The amount of the drug in Eric's blood was approximately 5 times the lethal dose. The toxicology report established that the fentanyl was illicit, manufactured in clandestine laboratories rather than obtained by prescription. It had been taken orally. Kouri Richins did not use drugs. He had no prescription for opioids. He had no history of substance abuse. 5 lethal doses of fentanyl ended up in his bloodstream for one reason and one reason only. Someone gave it to him without his knowledge. But the investigation moved agonizingly slowly. Death by fentanyl in America is, unfortunately, far from rare. Every day, more than 200 people in the country die from opioid overdoses. For the Summit County Police, accustomed to the quiet of a mountain town rather than investigating poisonings, the case was an unusual challenge. Detective Jamie Woody later admitted on the stand that by the fall of 2022, the investigation had essentially hit a dead end. Police knew the cause of death was fentanyl, but they could not determine who had administered it or how. The toxicology results took months to come back, and during all that time, Kouri remained free, collecting insurance payouts and playing the part of the grieving widow. The breakthrough came thanks to Eric's family. From the very beginning, they refused to believe in an accidental overdose. Crystal Bowman Carter, the attorney Eric had consulted shortly before his death about creating a trust, reached out to a private investigator named Todd Gabler. The family initially hired him for property disputes with Kouri, but Gabler dug deeper. He interviewed between 40 and 50 people. He pulled the billing records of both Eric's and Kouri's phones. And it was Gabler who uncovered the critical thread: hundreds of messages between Kouri and her housekeeper, Carmen Lauber, in the weeks leading up to Eric's death. Gabler also placed GPS trackers on the vehicles of Kouri, her mother, and her brother, tracking their movements. He handed the results of his investigation over to the police, and the stalled case came back to life. But even after her husband's death, Kouri did not stop. 3 days later, on March 6th or 7th, she texted Carmen Lauber, "Do you still have a connection to that guy?" Lauber was surprised. Kouri's husband had just died. She should have had other things on her mind. Kouri replied that she needed something to take the edge off. On March 9th, Lauber bought another batch of pills. Kouri paid with a check for $1,300. Why? The prosecution offered an explanation. Once the toxicology report revealed fentanyl in Eric's blood, Kouri would need a story for where the drug came from. Buying fentanyl after his death would allow her to claim she had been getting the pills at Eric's own request, that he had been using them himself. It was an attempt to create a false trail, to build a defense in advance. And then came the most cynical chapter of all. While the investigation continued, Kouri Richins assumed the role of the grief-stricken widow. She collected insurance payouts. The forensic accountant showed at trial that Kouri funneled the insurance money toward paying down her debts. Meanwhile, she continued seeing Josh Grossman, and she began working on a project that would eventually bring her to the attention of all of America. On March 7, 2023, almost exactly 1 year after Eric's death, Kouri published a children's book titled Are You With Me? It was self-published, 41 pages, colorful illustrations, a story about a boy who lost his father. The boy asks, "Are you with me when I'm sad, when I'm angry, when I score a goal, on my birthday, on Christmas, when I go to school for the first time?" And each time the answer comes back, "Yes, Dad is right there, like a guardian angel." Kouri gave interviews to local media, explaining that she had written the book with her children, the oldest of whom was 10. She spoke about the healing power of words, about how important it is to talk to children about loss. Journalists sympathized. Readers bought the book on Amazon. The picture was perfect, a young mother who had found the strength to turn tragedy into art. But at trial, an inconvenient truth emerged. Kouri had not written the text of the book. A ghostwriter she had hired did. Investigators obtained data from Amazon via subpoena and discovered text messages between Kouri and the ghostwriter. The book Kouri was so proud of was yet another fabrication, just like the signatures on the insurance policies. What is more, Kouri's mother sent a copy of the book to the sheriff's office, a gesture later interpreted as an attempt to reinforce the image of a grieving family in the eyes of investigators. On May 8, 2023, Kouri Richins was arrested. She was charged with murdering her husband by poisoning him with fentanyl. 10 days later, the charges were expanded to include fraud counts. Kouri had taken out $2 million in life insurance policies on her husband without his knowledge. From the moment of her arrest, Kouri was held in the Summit County Jail. The news of her arrest hit like a bombshell, not just in Camas, but across America. A woman who had written a book about childhood grief was now accused of killing the father of her children. The headlines could not have been more cinematic. CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox News, every major network picked up the story. The book was pulled from Amazon. Reviews that had recently praised a mother's courage turned into furious comments. On social media, the Kouri Richins case went viral. Millions of views on YouTube, discussions on Reddit, true crime podcasts devoted entire episodes to her. People who had bought the book before the arrest posted photos of the cover with captions like, "I bought a book from a murderer." The story became a symbol of how evil can masquerade as virtue. Eric's family, his parents, brothers, and sisters, finally received confirmation of what they had felt from the very beginning. Katie Richins Benson, Eric's sister-in-law, later testified about that morning of March 4th when she arrived at Kouri and Eric's house. Kouri was standing there, shaking her head. "She wasn't crying the way I was," Katie recalled. "She wasn't hysterical. She just stood there shaking her head. I was stunned." The trial of Kouri Richins began on February 10, 2026, with jury selection at the Summit County District Court in Park City. Nearly 3 years had passed from arrest to the start of trial, an unusually long period caused by numerous defense motions and changes of attorneys. Kouri cycled through several lawyers before settling on Wendy Lewis. Throughout that time, she remained in jail. She had been denied bail. Opening statements were delivered on February 23rd. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution called approximately 40 witnesses, from forensic scientists and toxicologists to family friends and financial experts. The prosecution constructed a sweeping portrait of the crime. Prosecutor Bloodworth presented Kouri as a cold-blooded manipulator who had spent years building a financial trap around her husband. Insurance policies, forged signatures, a secret lover, drug purchases, each element fell into place as part of a single mosaic of premeditated murder for money. The defense, led by attorney Wendy Lewis, built its strategy around the absence of direct evidence. Lewis argued that the prosecution could not explain exactly how Kouri had administered fentanyl to her husband. There was no video footage, no witnesses to the actual poisoning, no fingerprints on the pills. "They can't tell you how Eric ingested fentanyl," Lewis told the jury. "They didn't do their job, and now they want you to draw conclusions based on the thinnest of evidence. At the end of the trial, the defense made a surprising decision. It called no witnesses of its own. The move sparked heated debate both inside and outside the courtroom. Some believed it signaled that the prosecution's case was so weak it did not need to be rebutted. Others thought the defense simply could not find anyone who could help Kouri. But the evidence, circumstantial though it was, proved compelling. On February 26th, Carmen Lauber, the housekeeper who had served as the middleman in the fentanyl purchases, took the stand. Lauber testified as part of a plea deal. She confessed to buying drugs for Kouri in exchange for reduced charges on her own criminal cases, which had carried the possibility of life in prison. Lauber recounted how Kouri had repeatedly asked her for pills in early 2022. She described how Kouri had requested what Michael Jackson was on, referring to a powerful painkiller. Lauber found fentanyl, and Kouri agreed. The defense attacked Lauber's testimony, pointing to her own drug addiction, the plea deal, and a potential motive to tailor her testimony. But the jury heard the essential point. Kouri had deliberately sought out a lethal substance. On March 4th, Josh Grossman, Kouri's lover, took the stand. He was visibly shaken as he testified. Grossman confirmed the years-long affair, showed the text exchanges, and described the gifts and promises. And he quoted the very question Kouri had asked him in the Uinta Mountains after her husband's death. "Have you ever killed anyone?" Friends of both Kouri and Eric described their marriage as unstable. Eric had complained about his wife's financial problems and her spending, but he had no idea of the true scale of the disaster. Kouri had secretly drawn money from the mortgage on their shared home, without Eric's knowledge, to fund her failing renovation projects. Investigators presented another piece of evidence at trial, a letter in which Kouri had scripted testimony for her brother, and a diary entry describing the events of the night Eric died. GPS data and cell phone billing records allowed investigators to trace the movements of Kouri and Lauber on the days fentanyl was purchased. One juror later told reporters that the cell phone data had made the strongest impression on her. It corroborated every contact, every meeting, every purchase. The forensic accountant presented a detailed financial analysis. The jury saw the numbers: millions of dollars in debt, bounced checks, losses on every project, insurance policies taken out long before the murder. The financial motive was irrefutable. On March 16, 2026, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Kouri Richins was found guilty on all counts: aggravated murder for poisoning Eric Richins with fentanyl on March 4, 2022, attempted aggravated murder for the attempted poisoning via the sandwich on Valentine's Day, forgery for falsifying her husband's signature on an insurance policy, 2 counts of insurance fraud for filing a $100,000 policy with a forged signature and for submitting a claim after her husband's death. 5 charges, 5 guilty verdicts, not a single acquittal. One juror later told reporters that, at first, some members of the jury had felt sympathy for Kouri. A mother of 3, a young woman. At first glance, she did not look like a killer. People were genuinely sad because they didn't want to find her guilty, one juror said. But as the trial revealed detail after detail, the forged signatures, the fentanyl purchases, the affair with Grossman, the poison sandwich, sympathy gave way to certainty. "Every new piece of evidence shifted our perception," a juror said. Another juror admitted she was floored by the cell phone data tracking movements linked to the drug buys. "We all came to the same conclusion. She's guilty." Prosecutor Bloodworth, in his closing argument, called Kouri a black widow and told the jury she wanted the perfect life, or at least the appearance of a perfect life, and that life included a mansion in Midway with her lover, Josh Grossman. Sentencing is set for May 13th, 2026, a date that coincides with what would have been Eric's 44th birthday. Whether that is a coincidence or a deliberate choice by the court is unknown, but the symbolism is unmistakable. Kouri Richins faces 25 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the maximum penalty for aggravated murder in the state of Utah. And the Midway Mansion, the very dream house for which, according to the prosecution, the murder was committed, was never renovated. After Kouri's arrest, she lost all of her properties. In September of 2023, she defaulted on her mortgage loans. The mansion was sold at auction for $3,750,000 to a California businessman who completed the renovation. Nothing remained of Kouri's empire but debt and a conviction. 3 boys, Carter, Ashton, and Weston, who were 9, 7, and 5 at the time of their father's death, were left without either parent. Their father murdered, their mother behind bars. By the time the verdict was handed down, the boys were 13, 11, and 9. 4 years, half of their conscious lives, had been spent in the shadow of this case. Custody of the children was taken by Eric's family, his parents and sisters. The very people Kouri had tried to deceive, the ones she had greeted with dry eyes on the morning of March 4th. Now they are raising their grandchildren, trying to give them what their own mother took away: a normal childhood. The case of Kouri Richins is a story about how evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades. Behind the smile of a mother in a school photo, behind the cover of a children's book about love and loss, behind a note that says, "With love," on a sandwich laced with poison. Eric Richins knew. He told his friends, "I think my wife is trying to poison me." But those words drowned in the routine of daily life, in the refusal to believe the unbelievable. Because who would believe that your wife, the mother of your children, is capable of something like that? But there is another question in this case, one that remains open. A question for the system. How could a woman take out 6 life insurance policies on her husband without his knowledge? How did a forged signature pass the insurance company's review? Why, after Eric told his friends, in a direct statement, that his wife was trying to poison him, did no one sound the alarm? Why did the system fail to protect a man who was literally crying out for help? And why did the police need a private investigator hired by the victim's family to crack the case? Without Todd Gabler, without his persistence and professionalism, Kouri Richins might very well have remained free, a grieving widow, a children's book author, a single mother who had survived a tragedy, and no one would have ever known the truth. Kouri Richins coldly planned a murder. She found a source for a lethal poison in advance. She tried to poison her husband twice. When the first attempt failed, she did not stop. She asked for something stronger. She bought more fentanyl, she mixed it into a cocktail and served it to her husband, and then she calmly went to sleep. The next morning, she called the paramedics. She cried in front of the cameras. She accepted condolences. She collected the insurance money. She continued her affair with her lover. And she wrote a book, a children's book, about losing a dad, dedicated to the children from whom she herself had taken that dad away. At trial, the prosecution was unable to prove the exact method by which fentanyl entered Eric's body. There was no video of the poisoning. There was no witness who saw Kouri slip the powder into a drink. But the prosecutor did not need to prove the mechanics. He needed to prove intent and action, and the totality of the circumstantial evidence did so beyond any doubt. 4 fentanyl purchases, 2 poisonings, forged signatures, millions in debt, insurance policies, a secret lover. The question, have you ever killed anyone? A notebook with a cocktail recipe. Cold composure on the morning of March 4th. 3 hours was all the jury needed to see the full picture. When the word guilty rang out 5 times in a row, sobs erupted in the courtroom. Eric's family wept. Kouri Richins stood in silence, staring straight ahead. Just as she had the morning of March 4th, no hysteria, no tears. She just stood there, looking. In the small mountain town of Camas, where everyone knows everyone, people now know one more thing, that the woman who smiled at parent-teacher conferences, who led tours of her renovated homes, who signed books at the local shop, that woman coldly murdered the father of her children for money, and the only thing that gave her away was not her conscience, but a toxicology report. The book, Are You With Me?, is no longer available on Amazon. But the question in its title now carries a different weight. 3 boys, Carter, Ashton, and Weston, will grow up knowing that their mother killed their father. And to the question, "Are you with me?" they will have to find the answer on their own, without the father who could have held them, and without the mother who chose money over her own family.